Are you afraid of the dark? We have a story for you.
Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're going to talk about winter. Not the gentle snowfall you see on Christmas cards. Not the cozy scenes of families gathered by the fireplace. Tonight, we're talking about real winter. The kind that kills. The kind that transforms familiar landscapes into death traps. The kind that has claimed thousands of lives throughout American history. Winter storms are different from other natural disasters. A tornado gives you minutes of terror and then it's over. A hurricane, you can evacuate. An earthquake strikes and ends. But winter storms, they settle in. They stay. They trap you wherever you are and force you to endure hour after hour, sometimes day after day, of brutal cold and isolation. And that's when things get strange. When you're cut off from the world. When your survival is measured in hours. When the wind howls so loud you can't hear yourself think. That's when you realize just how alone you really are. Or worse, that you're not alone at all. Tonight, I have 9 stories for you. 9 true accounts of what happens when winter storms trap people in impossible situations. Some of these stories are from American history, events that have been documented and verified. Others are more recent, told by people who lived through experiences they still can't fully explain. All of them are true, so settle in, maybe pour yourself something warm, and let me tell you what it's really like when winter comes for you. Number, the schoolhouse blizzard. Let me start with a story from January 12th, 1888, a date that's burned into the history books of the American Great Plains. They call it the schoolhouse blizzard, or sometimes the children's blizzard, and if you know anything about it, you know why. But let me tell you a story you might not know, a story that came from the diary of a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who was a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse outside of Valentine, Nebraska. Her diary was found in an attic in 1967, and parts of it were published in a local historical society newsletter. Most people focus on her account of the blizzard itself, but there's something else in those pages, something she wrote about the days that followed. Here's what you need to understand about January 12th, 1888. The morning started warm, unseasonably warm for January in Nebraska. Temperatures in the 42s, almost 50 inches some places. It had been a mild winter, and people were starting to think maybe this year would be easy. Children walked to school in light coats, or no coats at all. Farmers worked in their fields wearing just shirts. Some people even opened their windows to let in the fresh air. Sarah Mitchell wrote in her diary that morning felt like spring was coming early. She had 14 students in her schoolhouse that day, ages ranging from 6 to 15. At noon, she let them play outside during their lunch break, and they ran around in the grass without jackets, laughing and shouting. That's when the temperature started to drop. At first, it was subtle, a shift in the wind, a change in the way the air felt. But within an hour, the temperature had plummeted 40 degrees, and it kept dropping. Sarah noticed the change around 1 o'clock. She called the children inside and closed the windows. Through the glass, she could see darkness rolling across the plains from the northwest. Not normal clouds, a wall of white and gray, churning and roiling, moving impossibly fast. By 1:30, the blizzard hit. Sarah wrote that it wasn't like any storm she'd ever seen. The wind came first, so powerful it rattled the schoolhouse walls. Then the snow, but not falling snow. Horizontal snow, driven by winds that would later be estimated at 60 miles per hour or more. And the cold, the temperature dropped to 40 below zero in just a few hours. The schoolhouse had a small stove in the center of the room. Sarah fed it coal, trying to keep the children warm, but the wind found every crack in the walls, every gap around the windows. The children huddled together near the stove, and Sarah read to them, trying to keep them calm. She made the right decision, keeping them there. Other teachers, in other schoolhouses across Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas, tried to send children home. Most of those children died. Some froze within yards of their own front doors, disoriented by the whiteout conditions, walking in circles until they couldn't walk anymore. The official death toll from the children's blizzard was 235 people. Most of them were children. Some teachers died trying to lead their students to safety. Some children made it home only to find their houses unheated, their families unable to start fires in the ferocious wind. But Sarah Mitchell kept her students in the schoolhouse for 3 days. The storm raged for 16 hours, but the aftermath was worse. Roads were impassable. The snow had drifted so high it covered fences, buried livestock, made travel impossible. Sarah and the 14 children were trapped. This is where her diary gets interesting. On the second night, Sarah wrote, "One of the children claimed to see someone outside. A boy named Thomas, age 9, said he saw a face at the window, not pressed against the glass, but standing back in the storm, watching. Sarah looked, but saw nothing except the endless white of the snow. She assumed Thomas was scared, maybe starting to see things in the blizzard. She had him move away from the window, closer to the stove. But then another child saw it. A girl named Martha, 12 years old. She said there was a man standing outside, just standing there in the storm, not moving. Sarah went to the window herself. She stared out into the blizzard, and for just a moment, she wrote, she thought she saw something, a dark shape against the white, tall and still. Then it was gone. She tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light, shadows created by the swirling snow. But more children started seeing it. Different windows, different times, always the same description, a tall figure, standing motionless in the storm. On the third day, the oldest student, a 15-year-old boy named William, asked Sarah if he could go outside to get more coal from the small shed, about 20 feet from the schoolhouse. They were running dangerously low, and the temperature inside was dropping. Sarah wrote that she knew it was risky. The wind had died down slightly, but visibility was still terrible. Snow had drifted up to the schoolhouse windows in some places, but they needed the coal. She tied a rope around William's waist and secured the other end to the door handle. That way, he could follow the rope back, even if he couldn't see. He wrapped himself in every spare coat and blanket they had and stepped outside. Sarah watched from the doorway, holding the rope, feeling it tug as William made his way through the snow toward the coal shed. He was gone for maybe 5 minutes. When he came back, he was shaking, and not just from the cold. Sarah wrote that William wouldn't speak at first. He sat by the stove, staring at nothing, his face completely white. Finally, he told her what he'd seen. On his way to the coal shed, he'd seen footprints in the snow, fresh footprints, large ones, barefoot, walking in a circle around the schoolhouse. But that wasn't possible. No one could survive barefoot in this temperature. The snow was 4 feet deep in places, and these prints were fresh, made recently, not filled in by the wind. William followed the prints with his eyes, as far as he could see. They made a complete circle around the schoolhouse, maybe 15 feet out from the walls, and then just stopped. In the middle of the circle, like whoever made them had simply vanished. When he got to the coal shed, William found something else. The door was open. They'd closed it before the storm. Sarah was certain, but it was standing wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside the shed, in the snow that had blown in through the open door, there were more footprints, the same large, bare feet. They walked into the shed, stopped in the middle, and then walked back out. William grabbed the coal and hurried back to the schoolhouse. He didn't tell the other children what he'd seen, just Sarah. That night, Sarah wrote, she stayed awake. The children slept in a pile near the stove, wrapped in every blanket and coat they had. She sat by the window, watching. Around 3 a.m, she saw it, a figure, standing in the snow, about 30 feet from the schoolhouse. Tall, impossibly tall, man-shaped, but wrong. It stood perfectly still, facing the building. Sarah wrote that she watched it for maybe 10 minutes. It never moved, never swayed in the wind, just stood there, and even though she couldn't see details through the darkness and snow, she had the overwhelming sense that it was looking directly at her. Then, slowly, it began to walk. Not toward the schoolhouse, around it, following the same circular path William had described. Sarah watched it make one complete circle around the building. When it returned to its starting point, it stopped, and then it was just gone. Not walking away, not disappearing into the snow. One moment it was there, and the next it wasn't. She wrote that she was too frightened to move, too frightened to wake the children. She just sat by the window until dawn, watching for the figure to return. It didn't. The next morning, the 4th day after the blizzard, men from the town finally reached the schoolhouse. They'd been digging through massive snow drifts, searching for survivors. They found Sarah and all 14 children alive. Not a single child died. Sarah Mitchell became a hero in Valentine, Nebraska. The newspapers praised her quick thinking, keeping the children in the schoolhouse when so many others had perished trying to reach home. But Sarah wrote in her diary about the figure in the snow, about the footprints, about the impossible feeling that something had been circling the schoolhouse for 3 days, waiting. The men who came to rescue them found the footprints too. They saw the circle around the schoolhouse. Some of them even followed the trail, trying to find where it led, but the prints just stopped. In multiple places, they just ended in the middle of empty snow. The men didn't talk about it much. This was 1,888 in a small Nebraska town. People didn't discuss things like that. But Sarah wrote about how the men's faces looked when they saw those prints, how they glanced at each other but said nothing. Sarah Mitchell taught at that schoolhouse for 2 more years. Then she quit and moved to Omaha. In her diary, she wrote that she couldn't stand being in that building anymore, couldn't stand looking out those windows, especially in winter, couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, walking in circles, waiting. The schoolhouse was torn down in 1923, but there's a historical marker there now, commemorating the children's blizzard and Sarah Mitchell's survival of it. What the marker doesn't mention are the stories that local people have told for generations. Stories about people who've gotten lost in winter storms in that area. Stories about how they sometimes report seeing a tall figure in the snow, standing still, watching, and how the ones who see it almost always survive, like something is showing them the way, or keeping them there until help arrives. Sarah Mitchell died in 1931. She was 68 years old. Near the end of her life, she told her granddaughter about that night, about the figure in the storm, about the feeling she'd had that it wasn't trying to hurt them, just watching, waiting, making sure they didn't leave. Her granddaughter asked her what she thought it was. Sarah said she'd spent 40 years trying to figure that out and had come to only one conclusion. Some things that live in winter storms are older than we can imagine, older than towns and schools and children, and sometimes, for reasons we can't understand, they choose to protect instead of harm. But they're still there, still walking, still watching, still waiting for winter. Number, the Donner Party survivor. You've probably heard of the Donner Party. If you've taken American history in school, you know the basics. A group of pioneers trying to reach California in 1846 got trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains by early snow, resorted to cannibalism to survive. It's one of those stories that's become almost mythological. We focus on the horror of what they did, the desperation that drove people to unthinkable acts. But there's more to the story, things that don't make it into textbooks. I'm going to tell you about William Eddy. He was a real person, a member of the Donner Party. His story is documented in diaries and historical records, but there's one part of his account that historians tend to gloss over, the part about the 3 days he spent alone in the mountains. William Eddy was 28 years old when he joined the Donner Party. He was traveling with his wife Eleanor and their 2 children, James and Margaret. The The family left Illinois in April 1846, full of hope about their new life in California. By October, they were in trouble. They'd taken a shortcut called Hastings Cutoff, which turned out to be anything but a shortcut. The route was poorly marked, difficult to traverse, and by the time they reached the Sierra Nevada, they were behind schedule and low on supplies. On October 28th, it started to snow. Early snow, the kind that shouldn't happen yet but did. Within a week, the mountain passes were impassable. The Donner Party was trapped at what's now called Donner Lake, with winter settling in and no way forward or back. They built rough cabins and shelters, rationed what food they had, and waited for the snow to melt. But it didn't melt. It kept snowing and snowing. By December, people were starting to die, not from violence or disease, but from starvation and cold. The livestock had been slaughtered and eaten. The meager supplies were gone. They ate their shoes, their leather goods, bark from trees, anything remotely digestible. That's when William Eddy volunteered for the Forlorn Hope expedition. 15 people, the strongest survivors, would try to hike out of the mountains and bring back help. It was a desperate plan, but they had no choice. William left his family behind on December 16th, 1846. His wife and children were too weak to travel. He promised he'd return with rescuers. The Forlorn Hope expedition is well documented. It took them 33 days to reach civilization. 10 people started, 7 survived. They had to resort to eating their dead companions. William Eddy was one of the survivors. But here's the part that's less well known. On the 17th day of the expedition, William got separated from the group during a blizzard. He wrote about this later in statements given to historians. But the accounts are brief, clinical. They don't capture what he told his family in private conversations. Those stories came out years later, shared by his relatives, and they paint a different picture. William got separated from the group while they were climbing a steep, snow-covered slope. The wind was brutal, visibility was almost zero, and the group was strung out in a line, each person following the one ahead. William slipped. He fell maybe 20 or 30 feet down the slope, rolling, sliding through deep snow. When he finally stopped, he couldn't see or hear anyone. The wind and snow had swallowed everything. He tried to climb back up, but the slope was too steep, the snow too deep. He was exhausted, half-starved, and freezing. So he did the only thing he could. He started walking downhill, hoping to find his way back to the group's path. He walked for hours. Night was coming. The temperature was dropping into the negatives. William knew he wouldn't survive the night in the open. That's when he found the cabin. It was small, barely more than a shed, made of logs with a sloped roof, completely covered in snow except for a small opening where the door should be. William crawled inside. The interior was a single room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. There was a stone fireplace on one wall, still full of old ashes, some shelves on the walls, all empty. A rough wooden frame in the corner that might have been a bed. William was just grateful to be out of the wind. He gathered what energy he had left and managed to start a small fire using a few pieces of wood he found inside the cabin and some birch bark he'd been carrying. The fire was tiny, barely enough to warm his hands, but it was something. That's when he noticed the smell. Not rot exactly, not decay, something else, earthy, old, like soil that hasn't been disturbed in decades. William tried to ignore it. He huddled by the small fire, trying to preserve his strength. His plan was to wait out the night, then try to find his way back to the group in the morning. Around midnight, he heard something. Footsteps on the roof. Slow, heavy footsteps, walking back and forth across the cabin's roof. The snow up there was probably 2 feet thick, but he could hear the steps clearly. Crunch, crunch, crunch. William froze. His first thought was that maybe someone else from the group had found the cabin. But why would they be on the roof? He called out. No answer, just the continued footsteps, walking back and forth, back and forth. Then they stopped, right above the fireplace. William stared up at the roof. The logs were old, weathered. He could see gaps between them where the chinking had fallen away. And through one of those gaps, he saw something, an eye. Looking down at him, William scrambled backward, away from the fireplace, his heart hammering. The eye followed him. Then it was gone, and the footsteps started again, moving to a different part of the roof. He spent the rest of the night pressed against the far wall, watching the ceiling, watching those gaps between the logs. Several times, he saw movement in the gaps, sometimes an eye, sometimes what looked like fingers, impossibly long, probing at the openings. But whatever was up there never tried to get in. It just walked and watched. When dawn came, the footsteps stopped. William waited until full daylight before he dared to leave the cabin. When he climbed out through the door, he immediately looked at the roof. The snow up there was disturbed. He could see clear impressions where something had walked, but they weren't footprints, not human footprints. They were long indentations, like something had been dragged across the snow, or like something with feet too long and narrow to be human had walked there. William didn't stay to investigate. He climbed back up the slope and, by sheer luck or fate, found his way back to the group's trail. He caught up with them later that day. He never told them about the cabin, not then. He was afraid they'd think starvation was making him hallucinate. And maybe it was. That's what he tried to convince himself, but he never forgot. Years later, after the surviving members of the Donner Party had been rescued, after William learned that his wife and daughter had died while he was gone but his son James had survived, after he'd tried to rebuild his life in California, he told people about that night. He told his second wife. He told his surviving son. He told a few close friends, and he told them about the thing he found the next year. In 1847, William Eddy joined one of the rescue parties that went back into the mountains to retrieve belongings and give proper burials to those who died. He wanted to find his wife and daughter. He needed to say goodbye. While he was there, he tried to find the cabin. He knew roughly where he'd been when he got separated from the group. He searched for days, hiking through areas that should have been close. He never found it. The cabin was gone. No sign it had ever existed. But he found something else. About a quarter-mile from where he thought the cabin should be, he found a cluster of trees, tall pines, very old, arranged in a circle, and in the center of that circle, the snow was stained dark, not red, not blood, just dark, like the earth beneath had been scorched or poisoned. William stood at the edge of that circle and felt the same feeling he'd had in the cabin, that earthy, old smell, that sense of being watched. He left and never went back. The rest of William Eddy's life is well documented. He remarried, had more children, worked as a farmer in California. He never talked publicly about what happened in that cabin. The historical records just note that he was briefly separated from the Forlorn Hope Party and reunited the next day. But his family knew, and they passed the story down. One of William's granddaughters, interviewed in 1920, said that William had nightmares until the day he died, that he'd wake up in the middle of the night, terrified, saying he could hear footsteps on the roof. She said he told her once that he thought the mountains were older than people realized, that there were things living in them that had been there long before settlers arrived, things that understood winter in ways humans never would. She asked him if he thought the thing on the roof had wanted to hurt him. He said he didn't know. Maybe, or maybe it had just been curious. Maybe it had been surprised to find a human in its territory, starving and freezing, and had been trying to figure out what to do. Maybe it had been deciding whether to help or to finish what the winter had started. William Eddy died in 1859. He was 41 years old. His son James, who survived the Donner Party as a child, lived until 1900. James rarely talked about that winter in the mountains, but when he did, he mentioned one strange thing. During the worst days of starvation, when people were dying and the survivors were doing unspeakable things to stay alive, James said He sometimes saw things moving in the trees around the camp, tall figures, watching from the shadows. He said all the children saw them, but the adults didn't, or pretended not to. He said the figures never came close, just watched, like they were waiting for something, waiting for everyone to die, maybe, or waiting to see if anyone would survive. James Eddy said he sometimes wondered if his father had met one of those things, if that's why William could never quite shake the feeling of being watched, even decades later, even far away from those mountains. The Sierra Nevada is a popular vacation destination now. Thousands of people visit Donner Lake every year. They ski, they hike, they camp. Most of them don't think about what happened there in 1846, and the ones who do think about it focus on the cannibalism, the human horror. They don't think about the things that were already there, the things that watched the Donner Party struggle and die, the things that walked on cabin roofs in the middle of the night. But those things are still there. The mountains haven't changed. The winters are still brutal. And sometimes, hikers report finding old cabins in areas where no cabin should be. Cabins that aren't on any map, that don't show up on property records. They usually don't stay long in those cabins. Something about them feels wrong. The smell, maybe. Or the sense that they're not alone. Or the sound of footsteps on the roof, walking back and forth, waiting. Number, the Great Blizzard of 1888. Let me tell you about March 11th through March 14th, 1888. The Great Blizzard, the most famous snowstorm in American history, at least on the East Coast. You've probably seen pictures. Massive snow drifts burying entire buildings in New York City. People using skis to travel down Broadway. The elevated trains stuck in place. Passengers trapped for days. The official death toll was 400 people. Probably more if you count those who died from exposure and weren't found until weeks later, after the snow melted. But I want to tell you about one death that's not in the official records. One story that was only told in whispers, in a family that didn't want anyone to know what really happened. This story comes from letters written by a woman named Catherine Brennan. The letters were donated to a historical society in Brooklyn in 2003, after the last member of her family died with no descendants. They'd been kept private for over 100 years. Catherine was a seamstress, living in a boarding house in Lower Manhattan. She was 23 years old in March 1888, unmarried, supporting herself through her work. By all accounts, she was practical, level-headed, not given to flights of fancy. On March 11th, 1888, Catherine left her boarding house early in the morning to walk to the shop where she worked. It was cold, but not unusually so. No one expected what was about to happen. The blizzard hit New York around noon. It came fast, the temperature dropping 40 degrees in just a few hours. The wind picked up to sustained speeds of 45 miles per hour, with gusts much higher, and the snow came horizontally, driven by that wind, making it impossible to see more than a few feet. Catherine was at work when it started. She and 5 other seamstresses, along with the shop owner, Mr. Gould. They worked on the 3rd floor of a building on Houston Street. Mr. Gould made the decision to close the shop early and send everyone home. In hindsight, they should have stayed, but no one knew how bad it would get. Catherine left the building around 1 in the afternoon, trying to walk back to her boarding house 8 blocks away. 8 blocks. In normal conditions, a 15-minute walk. She never made it. This is where the story gets strange, and where Catherine's letters become our only source. She wrote these letters later, trying to explain what happened, trying to make sense of it herself. Catherine wrote that she made it about 3 blocks before she realized she was in serious trouble. The wind was so strong she could barely stand. The snow was blinding. She couldn't see buildings, couldn't see the street signs, couldn't even see the street itself. She tried to hold on to buildings as she walked, using them as guides, but the snow was piling up so fast. Already, drifts were forming against the buildings, some of them 4 or 5 feet high. Catherine fell several times. The cold was incredible. She'd only been outside for maybe 20 minutes, but already she couldn't feel her feet or her hands. She realized she wasn't going to make it home. She needed to find shelter immediately. Through the driving snow, she saw an alley between two buildings. She stumbled into it, hoping to find a door, any door. The alley was narrow, and the walls on either side blocked some of the wind. Catherine could actually see a few feet in front of her. At the back of the alley, she saw a door. She tried the handle. Locked. She pounded on it. No answer. But next to that door, there was a window, basement level, just a few feet off the ground, and it was broken. Someone had smashed it, maybe recently. The opening was just big enough for Catherine to squeeze through. She didn't hesitate. She was freezing and exhausted. She crawled through the window, careful of the broken glass, and dropped down into darkness. She'd fallen into a basement. It was pitch black, but it was out of the wind, out of the cold, or at least less cold. Catherine sat on the floor, shaking, trying to catch her breath. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. A little light came through the broken window, just enough to see vague shapes. She was in a storage room of some kind. She could make out shelves, boxes, the outline of a staircase leading up to the floor above. Catherine pulled her coat tighter around herself and waited for her body to stop shaking. She figured she'd wait here until the storm passed, or at least until the wind died down enough for her to see where she was going. That's when she heard the breathing, not her own breathing. Something else, coming from deeper in the basement, from a corner she couldn't see. Slow, steady breathing, in and out. Too loud to be a rat or a cat, too steady to be the wind. Catherine called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The breathing stopped. Catherine waited. Nothing. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the building settling, or pipes, or something normal. Then the breathing started again. Closer this time. Catherine stood up, her legs shaking from cold and fear. "I'm not here to harm anyone," she said. "I just needed to get out of the storm. I'll leave as soon as I can." No response. Just that breathing, steady and slow. And then, very quietly, a voice. "You can't leave." Catherine wrote that the voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry or harsh. It was just matter of fact, stating a truth. "I will leave," Catherine said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "As soon as the storm calms down." "The storm won't calm down," the voice said. "Not for days. You'll freeze if you go back out there." That was true. Catherine knew it was true. Already, the cold was seeping into the basement. Even in here, she could die of hypothermia if she wasn't careful. "Who are you?" she asked. "I live here," the voice said. "In this basement?" "Yes." Catherine tried to see the person speaking, but it was too dark. She could only make out a vague shape in the corner. Sitting or crouched, she couldn't tell. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "A long time." "You live in this basement?" "Why? Where else would I go?" Catherine didn't know how to answer that. She was starting to think maybe this was a vagrant, someone homeless, living secretly in the basement of an abandoned building. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Do you need help?" "No," the voice said. "But you do. I just need to wait out the storm. You need to be warm. You're already too cold." That was true too. Catherine's teeth were chattering now. Her fingers and toes were numb. "Is there anything to burn?" she asked. "Any wood? I could make a fire." "No fire," the voice said quickly, almost alarmed. "No fire in here. I'll freeze without heat. I'll keep you warm." Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What do you mean?" "Come here," the voice said. "I'll keep you warm." Catherine took a step back toward the window. "I don't think so. You're afraid of me. I don't know you. You'll die if you stay cold." Catherine was trapped. She knew the voice was right. She was already hypothermic. If she didn't find a way to get warm, she wouldn't survive the night. But the idea of going deeper into that dark basement, toward that voice. "Show yourself," she said. "Let me see you." There was a long pause. Then the voice said, "You won't like it. Let me decide that." Another pause. Then Catherine heard movement. The shape in the corner stood up, and up, and up. It was tall. Very tall. Too tall to be standing upright in that basement. But somehow it was. It moved forward, into the dim light from the window, and Catherine saw it. She wrote in her letters that she couldn't quite describe what she saw. It looked like a person, but wrong. The proportions were off, the limbs too long, the face too narrow, and it was covered in something. Not clothes, something that looked like bark or scales or both. Something that seemed to move and shift in the shadows. Catherine screamed. "I told you," the voice said. It was coming from the thing, but the thing's mouth didn't move, or it didn't have a mouth. Catherine couldn't tell. She turned to climb back out the window, but she was too cold, too slow. Her fingers couldn't grip the window ledge. She felt hands on her shoulders, long fingers, too many joints, pulling her back, pulling her down to the floor. Catherine fought. She kicked and screamed and clawed, but the thing was too strong. It wrapped around her, its long limbs encircling her body, and then warmth. Catherine stopped struggling. The thing was warm, impossibly warm. Heat radiated from it, seeping into her frozen body. "I'm keeping you warm," the voice said. Like I said I would. Catherine wanted to keep fighting. Every instinct told her to get away, but the warmth, she needed it so badly. She could feel sensation returning to her fingers and toes. The shaking was subsiding. "What are you?" she whispered. "I live in the cold places," the voice said. "When the winter comes, I wake up. I've always been here, long before you, long before your buildings and streets. Are you going to hurt me? No. I'm keeping you warm. Why? Because you came to me. You asked for shelter. It's the law of winter." Catherine didn't understand. She was too tired, too overwhelmed. She closed her eyes and let the warmth seep into her. She slept. When she woke up, daylight was coming through the window. Dim, gray light, but light. She was alone. The thing was gone. Catherine was lying on the basement floor, wrapped in something that looked like a blanket but felt wrong. Rough and fibrous, like woven bark. She stood up, dizzy and disoriented. The storm was still raging outside. Snow was piling up against the window, nearly covering it. But Catherine was alive, and she was warm. She spent 2 more days in that basement. The blizzard continued, the snow getting deeper and deeper. She couldn't leave even if she wanted to. The window was completely buried. The thing came back each night. It never spoke during the day, but when darkness fell, Catherine would hear the breathing from the corner, and the thing would come out and wrap itself around her, keeping her warm through the freezing nights. During the day, Catherine explored the basement. It was mostly empty except for old wooden crates and shelves. She found a name stenciled on one of the crates: Brennan Imports, 1847. This building had belonged to her family decades ago, before she was born. It had been sold off years earlier. She wondered if the thing had been here the whole time, if her ancestors had known about it, if that's why the building had been sold. On the 3rd night, the thing spoke to her again. "The storm is ending," it said. "You can leave tomorrow." "Will I see you again?" Catherine asked. She wasn't sure why she asked. Maybe curiosity, maybe something else. "Only if you need me," the thing said. "What are you called?" "I don't have a name. Names are for things that matter to people. I'm not supposed to matter. You saved my life. I did what winter requires. You came to the cold place. I gave you warmth. It's the balance." Catherine didn't understand, but she nodded. The next morning, the storm had passed. The wind had died. Catherine dug herself out through the window and climbed up into a world transformed. New York was buried under 4 feet of snow. Drifts in some places were 15 feet high. The city was completely shut down. But Catherine was alive. She made her way back to her boarding house, climbing over and through snowdrifts, arriving 6 hours later. Everyone thought she was dead. They'd given up hope. She told them she'd found shelter in a basement. She didn't tell them about the thing. She never told anyone. Not until years later, when she was dying, and she wrote those letters, trying to explain, trying to make someone understand. The Great Blizzard killed 400 people. Catherine Brennan wasn't one of them, but she never forgot what saved her. And for the rest of her life, every winter, when the snow started to fall, she'd think about that basement, about that thing that wrapped itself around her and kept her warm. She'd think about the law of winter, the balance, the old things that live in the cold places, older than cities, older than people, and she'd wonder how many others have met them, how many others have been saved by things they don't understand and can never explain. The building where Catherine took shelter was torn down in 1923, but the basement remained, sealed beneath the new construction. It's still there, under a modern office building on Houston Street. I wonder if the thing is still there too, still waiting, still keeping the balance, still ready to wake up when winter comes. Number. The Isolated Cabin. This story takes place in January 2018 in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. It's more recent, and the person who experienced it is still alive. I'll call her Jennifer. Jennifer was a freelance photographer who specialized in nature photography. She'd spent years traveling to remote locations, capturing images of wilderness and wildlife. She was experienced, well-equipped, and not easily spooked. In January 2018, she rented a cabin in the Cascades to photograph winter landscapes. The cabin was remote, about 12 miles from the nearest town, accessed by a dirt road that was barely maintained in winter. The cabin belonged to a family who used it as a summer vacation home. They didn't visit in winter, but they rented it out to hunters and photographers looking for solitude. It was small, just one main room with a kitchen area, a bedroom, and a bathroom, wood stove for heat, generator for electricity, though the owner warned that the generator was temperamental in extreme cold. Jennifer arrived on January 10th. The weather forecast was for clear skies, perfect for photography. She planned to stay 5 days. The first 2 days were perfect. She hiked during the day, taking pictures of snow-covered forests and frozen streams. At night, she'd return to the cabin, edit her photos, read by the wood stove. On the third day, January 12th, the weather changed. A storm system moved in faster than predicted. What was supposed to be light snow became a full blizzard. Jennifer wasn't too concerned at first. She had plenty of food, plenty of firewood. She'd just stay in the cabin until it passed. But the storm didn't pass. It intensified. By evening, the wind was howling, the snow falling so thick she couldn't see 20 feet out the window. Around 9 p.m., the generator died. Jennifer tried to restart it, but it wouldn't turn over. The cold had gotten to it, or maybe something had broken. Either way, she was without electricity. That was fine. She had the wood stove, flashlights, a battery-powered radio. She'd be okay. She went to bed around 11, listening to the storm rage outside. The cabin creaked and groaned under the wind. Snow was piling up against the walls. She could tell by the way the sound was muffled. Jennifer woke up around 2 a.m. Something had disturbed her. A sound, different from the storm. She lay in bed, listening. There it was again, a scraping sound, like something being dragged across the roof. Jennifer got up and went to the window. The snow was so thick and the night so dark that she couldn't see anything, but she could hear it. That scraping, moving from one end of the roof to the other. Probably a tree branch, she thought, blown against the roof by the wind. She went back to bed and tried to ignore it. The next morning, the storm was still going strong. Jennifer looked outside and her stomach dropped. The snow had drifted so high against the cabin that it covered the lower windows completely, and it was still falling. She was snowed in. The door opened inward, which was good, but even so, she'd have to dig through several feet of snow to get out. And where would she go? Her car was buried. The road was impassable. She was 12 miles from town, with no way to call for help. Her cell phone had no signal out here, even in good weather. Jennifer decided to stay put. The storm would pass eventually. She had enough food and wood for at least a week, but that night she heard the scraping again, and this time it was accompanied by something else. Footsteps, not on the roof. In the cabin, Jennifer sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She listened. There they were again, soft footsteps, walking across the main room. She grabbed her flashlight and went to the bedroom door. She opened it slowly, shining the light into the main room. Nothing. The room was empty. The front door was closed, still barricaded with the snowdrift outside. The windows were intact, but she'd heard footsteps. She was sure of it. Jennifer checked the whole cabin, every corner, every closet. Nothing. She went back to bed, but she didn't sleep. She lay awake, listening. Around 4 a.m., she heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they were in the bedroom, walking around the foot of her bed. Jennifer turned on her flashlight and pointed it at the floor. Nothing. No one there. But the footsteps continued, moving around the room. She could hear them. The soft creak of floorboards, the subtle shift of weight. But there was nothing visible. Jennifer spent the rest of the night with her back against the wall, flashlight in hand, listening to invisible footsteps walk through the cabin. When dawn came, the footsteps stopped. The storm continued. Jennifer checked the cabin again in daylight. Still nothing. No sign that anyone had been there. No footprints in the snow outside, though that didn't mean much given how hard it was snowing. She tried to rationalize it. Old cabin, lots of creaks and groans, her mind playing tricks. Stress from being trapped, but she knew what she'd heard. That day, Jennifer tried to keep busy. She organized her supplies, read a book, tried to nap, but she was dreading nightfall. Around 8 p.m., before it was even fully dark, the footsteps started again. This time, they were louder, more aggressive, walking fast through the cabin. From room to room, Jennifer sat in the corner of the main room, her back against the wall, flashlight in one hand and a knife in the other. Not that a knife would help against something she couldn't see. The footsteps walked right up to her, stopped inches from where she sat. Jennifer shined her flashlight at the space in front of her. Nothing. Then she felt it. Breath on her face. Cold breath, smelling like winter air and something else. Something old. She scrambled to her feet and backed away. The footsteps followed her. Everywhere she went in the cabin, they followed. Finally, she locked herself in the bathroom. It was the only room with a door that locked from the inside. She sat on the floor, her back against the bathtub, and waited. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. She could hear them, pacing back and forth. Then the door handle started to turn, slowly, deliberately, testing it. Jennifer watched the handle move. The lock held. The handle turned back and forth. Then it stopped. And then something started to push on the door. Hard. The door bowed inward, the frame creaking. Jennifer screamed. She couldn't help it. She screamed and put her full weight against the door, trying to hold it shut. The pushing stopped. The footsteps moved away. Jennifer stayed in the bathroom for the rest of the night. She didn't come out until morning. Day 4. The storm was starting to wind down. The snow was still falling, but not as heavily. Jennifer was exhausted, terrified, and desperate to leave, but she still couldn't dig out. The snow was too deep, and she didn't have the right tools. She spent the day preparing. She found a snow shovel in a storage closet. She packed her essential gear in her backpack. She decided that as soon as the storm stopped, she'd dig her way out and hike to town, even if it took all day. She wasn't spending another night in that cabin, but night came again before the storm ended, and the footsteps started right at sunset. This time, they brought something new. Voices, whispers, multiple voices, overlapping, speaking words Jennifer couldn't quite make out. The whispers came from every direction, from the walls, from the ceiling, from under the floor, and the footsteps multiplied. Now there were dozens of them, all walking through the cabin, a crowd of invisible people moving through the small space. Jennifer huddled in the corner, hands over her ears, trying to block it out. That's when she saw them. Not clearly, just glimpses, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, shapes that appeared in the corner of her vision and vanished when she looked directly. But she saw them, or saw something, and they were getting more solid, more real. As the night went on, she could see them more clearly. Figures, human-shaped but translucent, walking through the cabin. They ignored her at first. They just walked, back and forth, as if they were doing something, going about some routine. But then one of them stopped and looked at her. Jennifer couldn't see its face clearly. It was like looking at someone through frosted glass, but she could tell it was looking at her. It started to move toward her. Jennifer ran. She didn't think. She just ran for the door. She fumbled with the lock, threw it open, and plunged into the snow. It was still dark, still snowing. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but she kept going, pushing through snow up to her waist, fighting her way away from the cabin. She made it maybe 50 yards before she fell. The snow was too deep. She was too exhausted. She lay there, face down in the snow, knowing she was going to freeze to death, but unable to make herself go back to that cabin. That's when she heard the voice. "You can't stay out here." Jennifer looked up. A figure was standing over her, solid, real, an old man in a heavy coat. "You'll die," he said. "Come with me." He helped her up and led her through the snow, not back to the cabin, to another building, partially buried in snow. A shed or workshop, maybe. The old man opened a door and pulled Jennifer inside. It was warmer than outside, though not by much. Dark, dusty. "Wait here," the old man said. "The storm will end soon. Then you can leave." "Who are you?" Jennifer asked, her teeth chattering. "I take care of the property," he said. "Have for a long time." "What's in that cabin? What are those things?" The old man looked sad. "This land is old. Before there was a cabin, there was something else here. Something happened. I don't know what, but it left marks. And in winter, when it's cold and dark, those marks come back. Why didn't anyone tell me? The family doesn't come here in winter. They don't know. And the people who do know, well, they don't come back." "You mean other people have seen this?" "Some. Most don't last long enough. They leave after the first night, or they don't make it out at all." Jennifer stared at him. "People have died?" "Two that I know of. They went into the cabin in winter, never came out. When spring came and the snow melted, we found them inside. No marks on them. They just stopped." "Why didn't you tell me?" Jennifer was angry now. "When I arrived, why didn't you warn me?" "I tried," the old man said. "I came by the second day, knocked on the door. You didn't answer. Thought maybe you'd left early." Jennifer didn't remember anyone knocking, but she'd been out taking photographs. She might have missed it. "What do I do now?" she asked. "Wait. Morning's coming. When it's light, you go. Don't look back at the cabin. Just go to your car, dig it out, and drive away. Don't stop until you're off this property. And if the things come out here, they won't. They stay in the cabin. It's where they belong." Jennifer waited in that shed until dawn. The old man stayed with her, not talking much, just sitting against the wall, keeping watch. When the sun finally rose, he opened the door. "Go now," he said. Jennifer didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her backpack and ran through the snow to where her car was buried. It took her 2 hours to dig it out, but she did it, fueled by adrenaline and fear. She got the car started, backed out onto the barely visible road, and drove. She didn't look at the cabin as she passed it, but she did look back once. When she was about a quarter-mile down the road, she looked in her rearview mirror. The old man was standing in the road behind her, watching her leave. He raised one hand in farewell. Jennifer didn't go back. She drove straight to town, checked into a motel, and slept for 14 hours. When she woke up, she called the family who owned the cabin. She told them she'd had to leave early because of the storm. She didn't mention what she'd experienced, but she did ask about the caretaker, the old man. The family didn't know what she was talking about. They didn't have a caretaker. The property was empty in winter. No one lived there. Jennifer described him. The family got quiet. Finally, the owner said, "That sounds like my grandfather. He used to take care of the property. But he died 15 years ago, froze to death in a storm. We found him in the old shed." Jennifer ended up publishing some of the photos she took on that trip. They were beautiful, haunting images of winter wilderness. But she never went back to the Cascades in winter, and she never rented a remote cabin again. She told this story publicly for the first time in 2023, 5 years after it happened. She said she'd waited because she wasn't sure anyone would believe her, but she wanted people to know. She wanted anyone planning to rent a cabin in a remote area to be careful, to ask questions, to trust their instincts, because some places in winter are more isolated than they seem. Some places hold memories, or ghosts, or things that don't have names, and some caretakers keep taking care of property even after they're gone, making sure people don't end up like they did, frozen, alone, forgotten. Number, the stranded trucker. This story comes from a truck driver I'll call Marcus. He shared this account on a trucking forum in 2015, and I was able to verify some of the details through weather reports and highway patrol records. Marcus had been driving long-haul trucks for 20 years. He'd driven through every state in the lower 48, through blizzards, ice storms, heat waves, you name it. He prided himself on being prepared, professional, never taking unnecessary risks. But in February 2014, he got caught in a situation that no amount of preparation could have prevented. Marcus was driving through Wyoming, heading east on Interstate 80. It was late afternoon, and the weather forecast called for snow starting that evening. Marcus planned to drive through the night, get ahead of the storm, and be in Nebraska by morning. But the storm came early, and it came hard. By 6 p.m., Marcus was driving through heavy snow. Visibility was maybe 50 yards. Traffic had slowed to a crawl. He was passing through a remote stretch of highway. Nothing but open plains on either side. No towns, no exits. Around 7 p.m., traffic stopped completely. Marcus could see brake lights ahead of him. A long line of vehicles, not moving. He tried his CB radio. Other drivers reported that there'd been a multi-vehicle accident up ahead, several miles. The highway was completely blocked. Nobody was going anywhere until it was cleared. That could take hours, maybe all night, depending on how bad the accident was. Marcus settled in to wait. He had a full tank of fuel, plenty of food and water in the cab, warm clothes. He'd be uncomfortable, but he'd be fine. The snow kept falling. Wind started to pick up. By 9 p.m., the storm had become a full blizzard. Marcus's truck was in the middle of a line of vehicles that stretched for miles. In front of him was a minivan. Behind him, another semi. They were all stuck, engines running to keep the heat on, waiting. Around midnight, Marcus noticed something. The minivan in front of him had turned off its engine. He watched for a few minutes. The snow was piling up on the minivan. No exhaust from the tailpipe, no movement inside. Marcus got on his CB, trying to raise the driver of the minivan. No response. He tried calling 911 on his cell phone. No signal. The storm was interfering with everything. Marcus made a decision. He bundled up in his heaviest coat, put on gloves and a hat, and got out of his truck. The cold was incredible. The wind was blowing at what must have been 40 or 50 miles per hour, driving snow horizontal. Marcus could barely see. He had to hold onto his truck to stay oriented. He made his way forward to the minivan. He could see someone in the driver's seat. He knocked on the window. No response. He knocked harder. The person inside didn't move. Marcus tried the door. It was unlocked. He opened it and immediately knew something was very wrong. The driver was a woman, maybe in her 30s. She was slumped over the steering wheel. Marcus checked her pulse. She was alive, but barely, hypothermic. She must have run out of gas and turned off the engine to save what fuel she had left. But without heat in this cold, hypothermia had set in fast. Marcus tried to wake her. She mumbled something but didn't open her eyes. He looked in the back seat. 2 children, both young, maybe 5 and 7 years old. They were wrapped in blankets, asleep or unconscious. Marcus checked them. They were cold, but alive. He made another decision. He got the woman and both children out of the minivan and into his truck. It took 3 trips, fighting against the wind and snow each time. By the time he got all 3 of them into his cab, he was exhausted and frozen, but his truck had heat. He wrapped the children in sleeping bags and cranked the heat up. The woman he propped up in the passenger seat, wrapping her in every blanket he had. Then he got back on the CB. He tried every channel, calling for help. Finally, someone answered. Another trucker, several vehicles back in the line. Marcus explained the situation. The other trucker said he'd relay it to the highway patrol when he could get a signal. But for now, Marcus was on his own. Marcus sat in his truck with 3 strangers, all of them hypothermic, in the middle of a blizzard on a blocked highway, and tried to keep them alive. The woman came around after about an hour. She was groggy, confused, but conscious. She told Marcus her name was Amy. The children were her kids, Tyler and Emma. They'd been driving to her mother's house when the storm hit. Her car had run out of gas around 11 p.m. She'd tried to keep the kids warm, but she only had 1 blanket in the car. She'd given it to them and tried to keep herself awake, but the cold had gotten to her. She'd started to feel sleepy. She remembered thinking she'd just close her eyes for a minute. If Marcus hadn't checked on her, she and her children would have frozen to death. The kids woke up slowly. They were scared and cold, but they were okay. Marcus gave them water and some granola bars from his emergency supplies, and then they all settled in to wait for rescue. But rescue didn't come. Hours passed. The storm raged. The line of vehicles didn't move. Marcus kept his engine running, burning through fuel. He watched his gauge drop slowly but steadily. He calculated he had maybe 8 hours of fuel left. After that, his truck would be just like Amy's car. Cold, a metal box in a blizzard. Around 3 a.m., Marcus noticed something strange. The other trucks around him were turning off their engines. He got on the CB. "Why is everyone shutting down?" A voice came back, tired and strained. "Saving fuel. Highway patrol says we're going to be here at least until morning, maybe longer. Snow's too deep for plows to get through. They're bringing in equipment, but it's going to take time." How much time? Could be another 12 hours. Could be more. Marcus looked at his fuel gauge. He didn't have 12 hours, not keeping the engine running. But if he shut off the engine, Amy and her kids would freeze. He made another decision. He told Amy he was going to turn off the engine to save fuel. They'd stay warm in sleeping bags and blankets for as long as they could. When it got too cold, he'd start the engine again for a while to warm up, then shut it off again. Cycling like that, he might be able to make his fuel last. Amy nodded. She understood. The kids were scared but trying to be brave. Marcus shut off the engine. The heat stopped immediately. Within minutes, the temperature in the cab started to drop. They huddled together for warmth. Marcus had Amy and the kids in the sleeping bags, wrapped in every blanket he had. He sat in the driver's seat, wearing his heavy coat, trying to stay warm. The temperature kept dropping. Marcus could see his breath now. The windows started to frost over from the inside. Around 4 a.m., Tyler, the older kid, said he was cold, really cold. Marcus started the engine, ran it for 15 minutes to warm up the cab, then shut it off again. He repeated this cycle every hour. Each time, his fuel gauge dropped a little more. By 7 a.m., he was down to a quarter tank, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. Marcus got back on the CB. He asked if anyone had heard from the highway patrol, if there was any update on when they'd be cleared. No one knew. Some people had managed to get cell signals for brief moments and had called for help, but there were hundreds of vehicles stranded on the highway. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Marcus did the math in his head. He had maybe 4 more hours of fuel if he kept cycling the engine. After that, nothing, and they were still 12 miles from the nearest town, 12 miles through a blizzard, through snow that was probably 4 feet deep by now. They couldn't walk out. Even if Marcus could make it, Amy and the kids couldn't. They'd freeze before they got a mile, so they waited. And Marcus kept cycling the engine, watching his fuel gauge drop lower and lower. Around noon, something changed. Marcus noticed the other trucks around him weren't running their engines anymore. At all. He got on the CB. Anyone else low on fuel? Multiple voices came back. Yes, most people were out or nearly out. They were just sitting in their cold vehicles now, wrapped in whatever they had, trying not to freeze. Marcus realized they were all going to die if help didn't come soon. That's when he heard it. A sound different from the wind. A rumbling, mechanical sound. Engines. Heavy engines. Getting closer. Marcus cleared the frost from his window and looked out. Through the blowing snow, he could see lights, bright lights, moving along the side of the highway. Snowplows, finally. But they weren't just plowing. They were stopping at each vehicle, checking on people. It took another 2 hours for them to reach Marcus's truck. By then, he was completely out of fuel. The cab was bitterly cold. Amy and the kids were shivering despite the blankets. When the knock finally came on Marcus's door, he'd never been so relieved. It was a highway patrol officer, bundled up in extreme cold weather gear. Behind him, Marcus could see snowplows and emergency vehicles. They got Amy and the kids out first, taking them to a heated emergency vehicle. Then, they helped Marcus out. His legs barely worked. He'd been sitting in that truck for over 18 hours, most of it in extreme cold. They took everyone to a temporary shelter set up in a high school gymnasium in the nearest town. Hot food, warm blankets, medical attention. Amy and her kids were okay. Mild hypothermia, but they'd recover. The doctor said if Marcus hadn't gotten them into his truck when he did, they would have died. Marcus stayed at the shelter for a day, recovering. When he finally called his company to report what had happened, they told him something that made his blood run cold. 3 people had died on that highway during the storm. 3 drivers who'd run out of fuel and frozen to death in their vehicles. All 3 were in vehicles within 100 yards of Marcus's truck. Marcus learned later that one of those people was in the semi directly behind him. He'd frozen to death sometime around 5 a.m., just 20 feet from where Marcus was keeping Amy and her kids alive. If Marcus had made different choices, if he'd stayed in his truck and minded his own business, if he'd saved his fuel for himself instead of cycling the engine to keep strangers warm, he might have been one of the 3 who died. Or Amy and her kids might have been. Marcus doesn't know why he got out of his truck that night, why he checked on that minivan, why he took on the responsibility of 3 strangers. He just did, and it turned out to be the right choice. But sometimes he thinks about those 3 people who died so close to him, wonders if he could have saved them too, wonders why he saw the minivan but not the other vehicles, wonders what made him notice. He thinks maybe it was luck, or fate, or something else. Because here's the thing, Marcus didn't tell anyone for a long time. Something he only shared years later, after retiring from trucking. When he was cycling his engine that night, during one of the periods when the engine was off and the cab was freezing, he saw something outside. A figure, standing in the snow beside his truck, tall and dark, barely visible through the storm. Marcus thought it was one of the other drivers, checking on people. He rolled down his window, ready to call out. But when he looked again, the figure was gone. And then he saw it again, later, and again. Each time he looked out the window, every hour or so, there it was, standing in the storm, always in the same position, beside his truck. Marcus never got a good look at it. The storm was too thick, the visibility too poor. But he could see its outline, tall, too tall, and it never moved, just stood there, watching. Marcus told himself it was his imagination, stress and cold and exhaustion creating hallucinations. But years later, He talked to another driver who'd been on that highway that night, and that driver mentioned seeing something strange, a figure in the storm, walking between the vehicles. He'd thought it was emergency personnel, but when he tried to flag it down, it disappeared. Multiple drivers reported the same thing, a tall figure moving through the storm. None of them saw it clearly. None of them could agree on the details, but they all saw something. The highway patrol had no explanation. They had emergency personnel out there eventually, but not until after dawn. No one was out walking in the storm during the night. Marcus doesn't know what he saw. He doesn't like to think about it, but he knows one thing. That figure stood beside his truck all night, and Marcus's truck was the only one in that immediate area where everyone survived. The 3 vehicles where people died. The figure was never seen near those trucks. Marcus thinks maybe it was showing him where he was needed, or maybe it was making sure he stayed focused, stayed awake, kept cycling that engine, or maybe it was just watching, seeing who would make it and who wouldn't. Winter does that sometimes. It tests you, pushes you to the absolute limit of what you can endure, and sometimes, in the middle of that test, you see things you can't explain, things that might be helping, or might be waiting to see if you fail. Marcus doesn't drive trucks anymore. He retired in 2018, after 24 years on the road. He lives in Florida now, where it never snows, but he still thinks about that night, about Amy and Tyler and Emma, who he saved, about the 3 people nearby who died, and about the figure in the storm, standing beside his truck, watching through the long, cold night. Number, the winter caretaker. This next story comes from the 1,970 seconds from a man named Robert, who worked as a caretaker at a ski resort in Colorado. The resort has changed ownership several times since then, been renovated, expanded, but back in the 70s, it was a smaller operation, and they only stayed open during peak season. From November through March, the resort was bustling, but from April through October, it was closed. The buildings were locked up, the lifts shut down, and one person stayed on site as caretaker, maintaining the buildings, watching for vandalism or break-ins, handling basic repairs. Robert took the caretaker job in April 1976. He was 25 years old, recently out of the military, looking for a quiet job where he could be alone and think about what he wanted to do with his life. The resort offered free housing in a small cabin on the property, decent pay, and basically asked him to check on things once a day and handle any problems that came up. It seemed perfect, and it was perfect. For the summer and fall, Robert spent his days hiking the mountains, reading, working on the cabin. He'd drive into town once a week for supplies. The rest of the time, he was alone with nothing but mountains and forests and sky. In October, the resort manager came up to prepare for the winter season. He walked through the property with Robert, checking that everything was in order. "You did a good job," the manager said. "If you want to stay on through winter, we could use you. Help with maintenance, operating the lifts, that sort of thing." Robert agreed. He liked it there, and the idea of spending winter in the mountains sounded appealing. "There's one thing," the manager said. "The staff moves into the main lodge during season. You'll have to give up the cabin. It's too far out. We need everyone closer during winter in case there's an emergency." Robert understood. The cabin was about 2 miles from the main resort buildings, connected by a small road that probably wouldn't be maintained in winter. "Where will I stay?" he asked. "There's a room in the basement of the lodge. Not fancy, but it's warm, and you'll have your own bathroom." Robert agreed. He packed up his things and moved into the lodge in late October. The ski season opened in early November. Suddenly, the quiet resort was full of people, skiers, families, staff running around handling 1,000 details. Robert's days became busy. He worked long hours, fell into bed, exhausted every night. He didn't think much about his old cabin. He was too busy. The season ran through the end of March. Profitable year, lots of visitors. By the time the last guests checked out and the staff shut down the lifts for the season, everyone was ready for a break. Most of the staff left immediately. Just Robert and the manager remained for a few days to lock everything up. "You staying through summer again?" the manager asked. Robert said yes. He'd move back into the cabin and resume his caretaker duties. The manager looked uncomfortable. "About that, the cabin, we're going to be doing some work on it, renovations. It won't be ready until summer. Is it okay if you stay in the lodge for a few more weeks?" Robert didn't mind. The basement room was fine. The manager left the next day, and for the first time in months, Robert was alone again. The first few nights were fine, quiet. Robert enjoyed having the whole lodge to himself. He'd make dinner in the big commercial kitchen, watch TV in the lounge, sleep in his basement room. But on the fourth night, he heard something. Footsteps. Above him, on the main floor. Robert got up and went upstairs. He turned on lights, checked all the rooms. Nothing. No one there. He went back to bed. An hour later, he heard it again. Footsteps, walking back and forth across the main floor. This time, Robert was annoyed. He went upstairs quickly, hoping to catch whoever was up there. Still nothing. But the footsteps continued for a few seconds after he reached the main floor. Then they stopped. Robert stood in the dark lodge, listening. Silence. He went back to bed. The footsteps didn't return that night. The next day, Robert checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Everything was secure. No sign of forced entry. No tracks in the mud outside. That night, the footsteps came back, and this time, they were accompanied by other sounds. Doors opening and closing. Something heavy being dragged across the floor. Robert went upstairs. The noises stopped when he appeared, but he could smell something. Cigarette smoke. Strong and acrid. No one had smoked in the lodge during the season. It was prohibited, and Robert didn't smoke. He searched everywhere, checked every room, every closet, found nothing. This went on for a week. Every night, noises, footsteps, doors, and that smell of cigarette smoke. During the day, nothing. Just Robert and an empty building. Finally, Robert drove into town and called the manager, told him what was happening. The manager was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're in the lodge? In the basement room?" "Yeah." "Robert, I should have told you something. Probably should have told you before winter even, but I didn't think it would matter since you'd be with the other staff." "Told me what?" "About 10 years ago, before the current owners bought the resort, there was an incident. A man died in the lodge." Robert felt his stomach drop. "How?" "He was the winter caretaker that year. Similar job to what you've been doing. He was alone in the lodge for a few weeks after the season ended, and he shot himself in the main lounge." "Why?" "No one knows. He left a note saying he couldn't stand it anymore. People figured maybe the isolation got to him, being alone all winter, going a little crazy. It happens sometimes in remote places. Which room was he staying in?" The manager hesitated. "The basement room, the one you're in now." Robert hung up shortly after. He sat in his truck in town, trying to decide what to do. He could refuse to go back, find a motel room in town until the cabin was ready, or quit altogether. But that seemed ridiculous. A man had killed himself there 10 years ago. Tragic, but it didn't mean the place was haunted. Robert went back to the lodge that evening. He told himself the noises were just the building settling. Old buildings make sounds, and the cigarette smell was probably coming from the vents. Residue from years of people smoking in the lodge before it was prohibited. That night, Robert went to bed, determined to ignore any sounds. But what happened that night wasn't something he could ignore. He woke up around 3 a.m. Someone was in his room. He could see a figure standing at the foot of his bed, silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway that seeped under his door. A man, tall, thin, just standing there, looking at him. Robert reached for the light switch. The lamp clicked on. The room was empty, but Robert could still smell cigarette smoke. Fresh, like someone had just been smoking. He got out of bed and checked the room. Nothing. He opened the door and looked into the hallway. Empty. Robert didn't sleep the rest of that night. He sat in a chair with the lights on until morning. The next day, he called the manager again. "I need to know more about the man who died. What was his name? What exactly did the note say?" The manager gave him what information he had. The man's name was Thomas Pritchard. He'd been 42 years old, a drifter who'd taken the caretaker job for one season. His suicide note was brief. "I can't stand it anymore. It won't let me leave." That last part stuck with Robert. It won't let me leave. Not I can't stand it here, but it won't let me leave. What was it? Robert decided to do some research. He drove to the county library and looked up old newspaper articles about the resort. He found the article about Thomas Pritchard's death. It confirmed what the manager had said. Suicide. No suspicion of foul play. The note he left suggested mental instability brought on by isolation, but Robert kept searching. He went back further, looking at the history of the land before the resort was built. The ski resort opened in 1955. Before that, the property had been undeveloped, forest and mountain land. Before that, in the early 1900s, it had been part of a mining operation, silver mining, mostly unsuccessful. The mine had closed in 1918. Robert found a mention of an incident at the mine in 1917. A cave-in had killed 3 workers. Their bodies were never recovered. The mine was too unstable to excavate safely. The location of that mine wasn't precisely noted in the articles, but based on the description, Robert thought it might have been very close to where the lodge now stood. He went back to the resort. In daylight, he walked around the property, looking for any sign of old mine entrances. He found one about a quarter mile from the lodge, collapsed, filled in, barely visible under decades of overgrowth. That night, Robert decided to stay upstairs in the lounge instead of his basement room. He made a bed on one of the couches and tried to sleep there. Around midnight, he was woken by a sound. Someone was trying to open the front door. Robert sat up. Through the windows, he could see a figure standing outside the door. A man, wearing old-fashioned work clothes, covered in dirt. The man was pulling on the door handle, trying to get in. Robert turned on the lights. The figure outside didn't react, just kept pulling on the door. Robert approached slowly. Through the glass, he could see the man more clearly now. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. His hands were torn and bloody, as if he'd been digging. Robert realized the man wasn't trying to open the door normally. He was digging at it, his hands clawing at the wood and glass. "Hey!" Robert shouted. "What are you doing?" The man didn't respond, didn't look at Robert, just kept clawing at the door. Robert grabbed a flashlight and went to another window to get a better view. When he looked, the man was gone, but there were marks on the door, long scratches in the wood, and something else. Dirt, smears of dark soil, almost black, all over the door and the windows. Robert spent the rest of the night in the lounge with all the lights on. When morning came, he examined the scratches on the door. They were real, deep gouges in the wood, and the dirt was real too. Black soil, almost clay-like. It didn't match the soil anywhere around the lodge. It looked like it had come from deep underground. Robert called the manager one more time, told him everything, the figure at his bed, the man at the door, the scratches and the dirt. The manager was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "I'm coming up there. Don't stay another night alone." The manager arrived that afternoon with 2 other people. They walked through the lodge, examined the scratches on the door, took pictures of the dirt. The manager said, "We should have told you more before. Thomas Pritchard wasn't the first caretaker to have problems. There was a man in the 60s who quit after just 2 weeks, said he kept seeing things. And before him, in the 50s, a caretaker disappeared, just vanished. They never found him." "Why didn't you tell me this?" Robert asked. "Because we thought it was just stories, rumors, people getting spooked by isolation. We didn't think there was anything really wrong with the place." They decided to seal off the basement level for the rest of the off-season. Robert moved to a different room on the 2nd floor. The manager and his colleagues stayed for 3 nights, keeping Robert company. During those 3 nights, nothing happened. No sounds, no figures, nothing. But the night they left, the activity started again. Footsteps, doors, and now, something new. Knocking. Someone knocking on Robert's bedroom door. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more knocks. Over and over. Robert opened the door. No one there, but the knocking would start again as soon as he closed it. Robert grabbed his things and left. He drove into town, checked into a motel, and called the manager the next morning. "I quit," he said. "I'm not going back there." The manager didn't argue. "I don't blame you. We'll find someone else." Good luck with that. Robert left Colorado a week later. He moved back east, took a job in construction, tried to forget about the ski resort, but he never forgot Thomas Pritchard, the man who couldn't leave. Years later, Robert learned something interesting. The ski resort had been sold in 1982, 6 years after Robert's experience. The new owners did extensive renovations, including excavating part of the property to expand the parking lot. During that excavation, they found something. An old mine shaft, partially collapsed, running directly under where the lodge stood, and inside that mine shaft, they found bones, human bones, 3 sets, presumably the miners who died in 1917 and were never recovered. They also found something else, a 4th set of bones, more recent. Dental records eventually identified them as belonging to the caretaker who disappeared in the 1,950 seconds. He'd gone into that mine shaft for some reason and never come out. The bones were all found in the same area, near what looked like a widening in the shaft, a larger chamber, and the walls of that chamber were covered in scratch marks, thousands of them, like someone had been trying to claw their way out. Robert read about this in a news article in 1983. He thought about Thomas Pritchard's suicide note, "It won't let me leave." He thought about the figure at his door, clawing at the wood, the man who looked like a miner, covered in dirt, desperately trying to get inside, or maybe trying to get out. Robert has a theory. He's never shared it publicly, but he told his wife years later when they were old, and he was trying to explain why he never wanted to go skiing, never wanted to visit mountains in winter. He thinks those miners, trapped in that shaft in 1917, never really left. They're still there, still trying to dig their way out. And when someone stays alone in that lodge, especially in winter when it's cold and isolated, those miners find them. They try to use the living to escape, trying to claw their way out through them. Thomas Pritchard felt it, that desperate, clawing need to escape. It drove him insane, made him kill himself. The caretaker in the 50s felt it too. Maybe he went into the mine shaft thinking he could find a way out, or maybe he was drawn there. Either way, he ended up trapped just like the miners. Robert felt it too, those few weeks. That growing sense of being trapped, even though he was free to leave any time. That feeling that something was trying to get out through him. But Robert left. He didn't stay long enough for it to take hold. The ski resort is still there. It's been renovated, expanded, modernized. The mine shaft was sealed during the 1982 excavation. The bones were given proper burial. But people who work there, especially the maintenance staff, who sometimes have to stay after hours in winter, report strange things. Footsteps when no one's there, the smell of cigarette smoke, the feeling of being watched. And sometimes, late at night, people hear knocking. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks, the sound of someone trying to get out, or trying to get in. Number, the Snowbound family. This story takes place in December 2006, in upstate New York. I got this account from a woman named Sarah, who experienced it along with her husband and 2 young children. Sarah and her family were driving home from visiting relatives in Vermont. It was December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas. They'd left early in the morning, hoping to avoid bad weather, but a storm system moved in faster than predicted. By 2 in the afternoon, they were driving through heavy snow on a rural highway. Traffic was light. Most people had the good sense to stay off the roads. Sarah's husband Mike was driving. Their 2 kids, Amy and Jason, ages 5 and 7, were in the back seat. They'd been driving for about 4 hours and were maybe an hour from home. That's when Mike hit black ice. The car spun out, slid off the road, and went down an embankment. It wasn't a steep drop, maybe 15 feet, but it was enough. The car ended up nose first in a drainage ditch, wedged between trees. No one was seriously hurt. Some bruises and some scrapes, but nothing broken. The airbags had deployed, and everyone had been wearing seatbelts. But the car was totaled. The front end was crushed, steam hissing from the broken radiator, and they were stuck. The car was tilted at a steep angle. Impossible to open the doors on one side, difficult on the other. Mike tried his cell phone. No signal. They were in a dead zone, or the storm was interfering with the tower. Sarah looked around. They'd gone down the embankment far enough that they couldn't see the road from the car, and in this weather, anyone driving by wouldn't see them either. They were stuck. In a wrecked car, in a blizzard, with 2 young children. Mike made the decision to stay with the car. That's what you're supposed to do in situations like this. Stay with the vehicle. Someone would find them, eventually. But the temperature was dropping, and the car's engine was dead. No heat. They wrapped the kids in every jacket and blanket they had. Sarah and Mike huddled with them in the back seat, trying to share body warmth. Hours passed. The snow kept falling. The car got colder and colder. The kids started to cry. They were cold and scared and didn't understand why they couldn't just go home. Sarah tried to keep them calm, told them stories, sang songs, but she was terrified. She could see Mike's face, the worry he was trying to hide. Around 6 p.m., it was full dark. They'd been stuck for 4 hours. No one had come by. No one had found them. Mike said he was going to climb back up to the road and try to flag down a car. Sarah begged him not to. The storm was too bad. He could get lost or freeze. But Mike said they didn't have a choice. If they stayed here all night in this cold, they might not survive until morning. So he bundled up and climbed out of the car. Sarah watched him struggle up the embankment, slipping and sliding in the snow. He made it to the top and disappeared. Sarah waited with the kids. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. Mike didn't come back. Sarah tried to stay calm for the children, but inside she was panicking. Had Mike gotten lost? Had something happened to him? The kids were shivering now, despite all the blankets. Their lips were starting to turn blue. Sarah knew the signs of hypothermia. They were running out of time. She made a decision. She was going to have to leave the kids and go for help herself. She told Amy and Jason to stay in the car, to stay under the blankets, and keep each other warm. She'd be back as soon as she could. But as she was preparing to climb out of the car, she heard something, a voice, calling from outside. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Not Mike's voice. Someone else. Sarah yelled back, "Yes, we're here. We need help." A figure appeared at the top of the embankment, a man, barely visible through the snow and darkness. "I saw your car from the road," the man called down. "Are you okay? Is anyone hurt?" "We're okay, but we're trapped, and we're freezing. My husband went for help an hour ago. Have you seen him?" "No, I haven't seen anyone, but I'll help you. Stay there." The man disappeared. Sarah heard an engine starting. Then she saw lights. A truck was backing down the embankment, moving carefully through the snow. The truck stopped near their car. The man got out. He was older, maybe in his 60s, wearing heavy winter gear. "Let's get you out of there," he said. He helped Sarah get the kids out of the car and into his truck. The truck's heater was running full blast. The kids immediately started to warm up. "Thank you," Sarah said. "Thank you so much. But my husband, he's out there somewhere. We need to find him." "We will," the man said. "But first, let's get you and the kids somewhere safe." He drove carefully back up to the road. Once they were on level ground, he stopped and got out his cell phone. "Still no signal," he said. "Storm's interfering, but my place is just up the road. 5 minutes. You can warm up there, and we'll figure out how to find your husband." Sarah didn't have much choice. The kids needed to be somewhere warm, and she was starting to lose feeling in her own fingers and toes. The man drove slowly through the storm. True to his word, after about 5 minutes, they turned onto a smaller road and then into a driveway. A house appeared through the snow. Small, 1 story, lights in the windows. It looked warm and welcoming. The man helped Sarah get the kids inside. The house was indeed warm. A wood stove was burning in the living room, filling the space with heat. "Sit by the stove," the man said. "I'll make you some hot chocolate." Sarah got the kids settled by the stove. They were still shivering, but they were alive, safe. The man brought mugs of hot chocolate and some blankets. The kids wrapped up and sipped their drinks. Sarah tried to thank him, but he waved it off. "It's what anyone would do." "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "James," he said. "James Miller. I'm Sarah. These are my kids, Amy and Jason." James smiled at the kids. "You two were very brave today." Sarah's mind was racing. "James, we need to find my husband. He's out there in the storm. He might be lost or hurt." "I know," James said. "As soon as this storm lets up a bit, I'll go out looking. But right now, it's too dangerous. The visibility is almost zero. We'd just get lost ourselves." Sarah knew he was right, but the thought of Mike out there alone was killing her. "Does your phone work here?" she asked. James shook his head. "Landline's out. Been out since yesterday because of the storm, and cell service is spotty out here even in good weather." Sarah felt tears starting. "What are we going to do?" "We wait," James said gently. "The storm has to end eventually. When it does, we'll find your husband. He's probably found shelter somewhere, just like you did." Sarah wanted to believe that. She had to believe that. They spent the next few hours in James's living room. He fed them soup and bread. The kids, exhausted from their ordeal, eventually fell asleep on the couch. Sarah tried to stay awake, but exhaustion was pulling at her too. Around midnight, she finally dozed off. She woke up to find daylight coming through the windows. The storm had stopped. Everything outside was white and silent. James was in the kitchen making coffee. "Good morning," he said when he saw Sarah was awake. "Storm broke about an hour ago. I was just about to wake you. We should go look for your husband now." Sarah woke the kids and got them settled with breakfast. Then she and James got ready to go out. James had a snowmobile. They used it to follow the road back to where Sarah's car had gone off. In daylight, the crash site was visible from the road, though just barely. They searched the area, calling Mike's name. No response. Sarah was getting frantic. Where was he? They expanded the search, going up and down the road. James called out, his voice carrying through the still morning air. Finally, after about an hour, they found him. Mike was about half a mile up the road from the crash site, huddled against a tree. He was unconscious, buried in snow, but alive. James and Sarah got him onto the snowmobile and rushed him back to the house. They called 911, and this time, the call went through. An ambulance arrived 30 minutes later. Mike was severely hypothermic but alive. The paramedics said if he'd been out there another hour, he probably wouldn't have made it. The family was taken to the hospital. Mike spent 2 days there, recovering. The doctors said he'd been incredibly lucky. When Mike was released, Sarah wanted to go back to thank James properly, to give him a gift, to express their gratitude for saving their lives. They drove back to the area, following the route they remembered. Found the road where James's house should be, but there was no house, no driveway, just empty forest. Sarah was confused. She was sure this was the right place. The intersection looked familiar. The distance from the main road matched. They drove up and down the road several times. No house. No James Miller. Finally, Sarah went to the local sheriff's office and asked about James Miller. Described him. Described his house. The sheriff looked at her strangely. "James Miller? There's no one by that name living around here. Not that I know of. But he rescued us," Sarah insisted. "He took us to his house. We spent the night there, The sheriff pulled up property records. "Ma'am, that road where you think you saw a house, there's nothing on it. No houses, no buildings. It's all forest land. Has been for decades." Sarah couldn't believe it. She had the kids describe what they remembered. They all had the same memory. James's house, the wood stove, the hot chocolate, but there was no record of it existing. The sheriff suggested that maybe in the stress and cold, Sarah had gotten confused about where they'd been. Maybe they'd been taken somewhere else. But Sarah knew what she remembered, and so did the kids. They never found James Miller, never found his house. It was like he and his home had appeared just for that one night, just long enough to save them, and then vanished. Sarah has theories. She wonders if James was a ghost, the spirit of someone who'd lived on that land long ago. Someone who understood what it was like to be trapped in a winter storm. Or maybe he was something else. An angel, a guardian, something that appears when people need help desperately enough. She doesn't know. She'll never know. But she knows that without James Miller, whoever or whatever he was, she and her children would have frozen to death in that car. And sometimes, on winter nights, when the snow is falling and the wind is howling, Sarah thinks about him, wonders if he's out there somewhere, waiting for the next person who needs him, the next family trapped in a storm, desperate and freezing and out of options. And she hopes that if anyone ever finds themselves in that situation, they'll see those lights through the snow. They'll find that small house with the warm wood stove and the kind old man who offers hot chocolate and blankets. Because winter is brutal, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and death is a kindness that can't be explained. Number, the ice storm, power outage. This story comes from January 1998, during what's known as the North American ice storm. It's one of the most devastating ice storms in recorded history, affecting parts of Canada and the northeastern United States. Ice storms are different from blizzards. There's no heavy snow, no whiteout conditions, just freezing rain that coats everything in ice. Trees snap under the weight, power lines come down, roads become skating rinks, and the power goes out, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. This is the story of Margaret Chen, who lived through 5 days without power during the 1998 ice storm in a farmhouse in rural Maine. She was 72 years old at the time, living alone after her husband had passed away the year before. Margaret's farmhouse was old, built in the 1922. It had a fireplace, which was good, but it was heated primarily by electric baseboard heaters. No power meant no heat. The ice storm started on January 5th, 1998. Margaret woke up to the sound of tree branches snapping. The temperature had dropped overnight, and freezing rain had coated everything in a thick layer of ice. By mid-morning, the power was out. Margaret called the electric company. They said crews were working on it, but the damage was extensive. It might be a day or two before power was restored. Margaret was prepared. She had a woodpile, plenty of food, candles, and flashlights. She'd lived through New England winters her whole life. She could handle a day or two without power, but the ice kept falling, and the temperature kept dropping. Margaret started a fire in the fireplace. It helped, but the old farmhouse was drafty. The heat from the fireplace only warmed the living room. The rest of the house was freezing. By the second day, January 6th, Margaret realized she was in trouble. The power company was now saying it could be a week before service was restored. The ice damage was worse than anyone had anticipated. Thousands of homes were without power. Margaret's phone still worked, thank God. The old landline was on a different system. She called her daughter in Boston, told her she was okay but concerned about the cold. Her daughter wanted her to come stay in Boston until the power came back, but the roads were impassable. Ice had made driving impossible, and Margaret couldn't walk out. The nearest neighbor was a mile away, and at 72, in this weather, she'd never make it. So she stayed, and tried to stay warm. She brought blankets down to the living room and made a nest near the fireplace. She wore multiple layers of clothing. She ate cold food to conserve the firewood for heat, but the house kept getting colder. The fireplace just couldn't heat enough space, and Margaret's supply of firewood was finite. She'd have to ration it carefully. By the third day, strange things started happening. Margaret woke up in the middle of the night, shivering despite all the blankets. The fire had gone out. She got up to add more wood. As she was kneeling by the fireplace, trying to restart the fire with shaking hands, she heard a sound from the kitchen. Footsteps, heavy footsteps, walking across the kitchen floor. Margaret froze. "Hello?" she called out. "Is someone there?" No answer, but the footsteps continued, walking from one end of the kitchen to the other. Margaret grabbed her flashlight and went to investigate. The kitchen was empty, dark and freezing cold, but empty. She checked the doors, all locked. The windows were intact, covered in ice on the outside. No one could have gotten in, and even if they had, why would they be walking around in her dark, freezing house? Margaret went back to the living room and restarted the fire. She told herself it was the house settling in the cold. Old houses make noises, but she didn't really believe it. The next night, the footsteps came again. This time, they started in the kitchen and moved through the dining room, into the hallway, getting closer to where Margaret was huddled by the fireplace. She sat very still, listening. The footsteps reached the doorway of the living room and stopped. Margaret shined her flashlight at the doorway. Nothing there, but she had the overwhelming sensation of being watched. "Who are you?" she asked. "What do you want?" No response. After a moment, the footsteps moved away, back down the hall. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She kept the fire going and sat with her back to the wall, watching the doorway. On the fourth day, January 8th, Margaret was starting to feel the effects of the cold. She was exhausted from lack of sleep. Her hands shook constantly. She was burning through her firewood faster than she'd planned because she was too scared to let the fire go out at night. She called her daughter again, told her about the footsteps, though she felt foolish doing so. Her daughter was worried. "Mom, you need to get out of there. You're not thinking clearly. The cold is affecting you." "Maybe," Margaret said. "But I heard what I heard. Even if you did, you can't stay there. You're going to freeze. The roads are still bad. I can't drive out." "Then walk to the neighbors. Someone will help you. In this weather, I'm 72. I'd never make it." Her daughter was crying now. "Mom, please. I don't want to lose you." Margaret promised she'd think about it. But after hanging up, she knew she couldn't leave. Not in this cold. She'd have to wait it out. That night, the fourth night, things got worse. The footsteps came again, but this time, they were accompanied by other sounds. Doors opening and closing, drawers being pulled out, the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. It sounded like someone was searching the house. Margaret stayed in her nest by the fireplace, too frightened to investigate. She wrapped herself in blankets and tried to ignore the sounds. Then she smelled it. Smoke. Not from her fireplace. This was different. Cigarette smoke. Her husband had smoked. He'd quit 10 years before he died. But Margaret remembered the smell. Strong, acrid. She hadn't smelled cigarette smoke in this house since he quit. And certainly not since he died. But there it was. Unmistakable. "Frank?" she whispered. Her husband's name. "Is that you?" The sound stopped. The house fell silent. Margaret waited. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then, very quietly, she heard a voice. Maggie, her husband's voice. Frank was the only person who'd ever called her Maggie. "Frank." Margaret's voice shook. "You're not real. You're dead. I know." The voice was sad. Close, like he was standing right next to her. But she couldn't see anything. "What are you doing here? I'm worried about you. You're too cold. You need to stay warm." Margaret started crying. "I'm trying, but it's so cold, and I'm scared." "I know. That's why I came." Margaret felt something. Warmth, like someone had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, but there was no one there. The warmth spread through her body. For the first time in days, she stopped shivering. "Thank you," she whispered. "I need you to promise me something," Frank's voice said. "Tomorrow, when the sun comes up, you're going to walk to the Hendersons' house. Do you understand? The Hendersons were the neighbors a mile away." "I can't walk that far," Margaret said. "Not in this cold. You can, and you will, because if you stay here another night, you won't survive. I can keep you warm tonight, but tomorrow you have to save yourself. But promise me, Maggie." Margaret closed her eyes. "I promise." "Good. Now sleep. I'll stay with you." Margaret did sleep, for the first time in days, wrapped in that impossible warmth. She slept deeply. When she woke up, sunlight was streaming through the windows. The fire in the fireplace had gone out, but Margaret wasn't cold. She was warm, as if she'd spent the night in a heated room. She looked around. Everything seemed normal, just an old, cold house. But Margaret remembered the promise she'd made. She got dressed in her warmest clothes, packed a small bag with essentials, and prepared to walk to the Hendersons' house. Before she left, she stood in the living room and spoke out loud. "Thank you, Frank. I love you. I always will." The house was silent, but Margaret felt a presence, warm and comforting, and she knew he'd heard her. She walked out into the ice-covered world. The mile to the Hendersons' house was brutal. She slipped and fell twice. Her legs ached. Her lungs burned from breathing the cold air, but she made it. The Hendersons were shocked to see her. They brought her inside, warmed her up, gave her hot soup. "You shouldn't have tried to walk here," Mrs. Henderson scolded. "You could have died." "I had to," Margaret said. "Someone told me to." The Hendersons didn't understand, but they didn't press her. They let Margaret stay with them for the next 3 days, until the power finally came back on and the roads were passable. When Margaret finally returned to her farmhouse, everything was as she'd left it. Cold, empty, normal. But she found something by the fireplace, in her nest of blankets, where she'd slept that last night. A pack of cigarettes, Frank's brand, the same brand he'd smoked before he quit. The pack was old, yellowed with age. It had been in the house somewhere all these years, and somehow, that night, it had ended up right where Margaret had been sleeping. A sign, a reminder. Frank had come back one more time to keep her warm, to save her life, to make sure she didn't give up. Margaret lived in that farmhouse for another 10 years. She died peacefully in 2008 at the age of 82. But she never forgot those 5 days during the ice storm, never forgot the footsteps and the cigarette smoke and the warmth that had no source. And she never doubted that Frank had been there, that he'd come back from wherever the dead go to make sure she survived. Because love doesn't end with death. Sometimes it comes back. Sometimes it keeps us warm in the coldest night. Sometimes it saves us when we have nothing left. Number. The school bus in the blizzard. The last story I want to tell you tonight happened in December 1977 in rural Montana. It's a story that was covered extensively in local news at the time but has been largely forgotten now. It's the story of a school bus driver named Daniel Warren and the 12 children who were on his bus when a blizzard hit without warning. Daniel was 53 years old in 1977. He'd been driving a school bus for the district for 15 years. He knew every road in the county, every shortcut, every dangerous curve. He was reliable, careful, and well-liked by the kids and their parents. On December 14th, 1977, Daniel was driving his afternoon route, taking kids home from school. It was a Wednesday, 2 weeks before Christmas break. The weather forecast that morning had called for possible light snow in the evening. Nothing unusual for Montana in December. School went ahead as normal. But weather in Montana can change fast, very fast. Daniel picked up his kids at the usual time, 3:30 p.m. 12 kids, ages ranging from 6 to 13, living on farms and ranches spread across 30 miles of rural roads. When Daniel started his route, the sky was cloudy but not threatening. No snow yet. Temperature in the mid-20s. By the time he'd dropped off his first 2 kids, around 3:45, It had started to snow, light flurries, nothing concerning. But by 4, the snow was getting heavier, and the wind was picking up. Daniel had 10 kids still on the bus. His route would take another 45 minutes in normal conditions, but conditions were deteriorating fast. By 4:15, Daniel was driving through a full blizzard. Visibility was less than 50 feet. The wind was so strong it was pushing the bus sideways on the road. Snow was accumulating fast, making the unpaved rural roads treacherous. Daniel made a decision. He couldn't keep driving. He couldn't see where he was going. And if he went off the road out here, they'd be in serious trouble. He needed to find shelter and wait out the storm. He remembered there was a church about 2 miles ahead, a small rural church that served the scattered farms in the area. It would have a phone. He could call for help and wait there with the kids until it was safe. Daniel pushed forward slowly, barely able to see the road. The bus struggled through deepening snow. He almost missed the turnoff to the church, but he saw it at the last moment and carefully turned onto the access road. The church appeared through the snow, a small white building with a modest steeple. No lights on. It was Wednesday evening. No services. The church would be empty, but unlocked. Rural churches often were in those days. Daniel pulled the bus up as close to the church entrance as he could and told the kids they were going to wait inside until the storm passed. Some of the kids were scared. The littlest ones were crying, but the older kids helped calm them down, and Daniel got everyone off the bus and into the church. The church was cold but out of the wind. Daniel tried the light switches. No power. The storm must have knocked out the lines. He tried the phone. Dead. Okay. Plan B. They'd wait here. Someone would come looking for them when they realized the bus hadn't completed its route. The families of these kids would call the school. The school would call the county. Search parties would be sent out. They just had to stay warm until then. The church had a small wood stove in the back room. Daniel found wood stacked next to it and matches in a drawer. He got a fire going. The kids gathered around the stove. Daniel took attendance, making sure he had all 10 kids. He did. Everyone was accounted for. We're going to be okay, Daniel told them. We'll wait here until the storm stops, and then someone will come get us. In the meantime, let's stay warm and stay together. The kids nodded. The older ones understood the situation. The younger ones were just glad to be somewhere warm. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. Daniel could hear the wind howling outside, rattling the church windows. He kept the fire going. The kids started to get hungry. Daniel had his lunchbox with some crackers and a thermos of coffee. The kids shared what they had in their backpacks. A few granola bars, some chips, not much, but something. Night fell. The church was dark except for the glow from the wood stove. Daniel lit some candles he found in a cabinet. Around 8 p.m., one of the older kids, a 13-year-old girl named Rachel, spoke up. Mr. Warren, I saw something outside. Daniel looked at her. What do you mean? I looked out the window. There's someone standing out there, in the snow. Daniel went to the window Rachel had been looking out. He peered through the frost and darkness. At first, he saw nothing but snow and wind. Then he saw it. A figure, standing about 50 yards from the church, not moving despite the wind, just standing there, facing the building. Daniel's first thought was that it was a rescuer. Someone had come looking for them, but that didn't make sense. A rescuer would come to the church, knock on the door, not stand out in the blizzard. Stay here, Daniel told the kids. He grabbed his flashlight and went to the church door. He opened it and was immediately hit by the full force of the wind. Snow drove into his face, stinging and blinding. "Hello," he shouted. "Do you need help?" No response. Through the snow, he could still see the figure, still standing there, still not moving. Daniel stepped outside, shielding his face with his arm. He started walking toward the figure. When he was maybe 20 yards away, he stopped. The figure wasn't dressed for winter weather. It was wearing what looked like a light coat or jacket. No hat, no gloves, and it wasn't moving at all. Not shivering, not swaying in the wind, just standing. "Hey," Daniel called. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't respond, but it turned, slowly, deliberately. It turned to face Daniel directly. Daniel shined his flashlight at it. In the beam, he saw a face, pale, gaunt, eyes that reflected the light like an animal's, and it smiled, not a friendly smile. A too wide smile that showed too many teeth. Daniel backed up. Instinct told him to get away from this thing, to get back to the church. He turned and ran. The wind pushed against him, and the snow made it hard to see, but he made it back to the church and slammed the door behind him. The kids were all watching him, wide-eyed. "What was it?" Rachel asked. "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. "But we're staying inside. No one goes out there. Understand?" All the kids nodded. Daniel looked out the window. The figure was still there, still standing in the same spot, still smiling. Over the next hour, more figures appeared. Daniel counted 5 of them, all standing at different positions around the church, all equidistant from the building, forming a circle, all of them wearing inadequate clothing for the weather, all of them standing perfectly still despite the wind and snow, all of them facing the church. The kids started to notice. Some of them were crying now. Even the older ones were scared. "What are they?" one of the younger kids asked. Daniel didn't have an answer. Around 10 p.m., the figures started to move. Not toward the church, just moving, swaying, dancing almost. In unison, all 5 of them moving in the same rhythm. Daniel kept the kids away from the windows, kept them by the wood stove, kept the fire going, tried to distract them with stories and songs, but he could see the figures, moving in their circle, dancing in the blizzard, and he could hear something, a sound underneath the wind, singing. The figures were singing. Daniel couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the melody, high and eerie and completely wrong. This went on for hours. The singing, the dancing, the figures circling the church. Around 2 in the morning, everything stopped. The singing ceased. The figures stopped moving, and then, one by one, they walked away into the storm and disappeared. Daniel waited, watched, but they didn't come back. The storm was finally starting to calm down. The wind was less intense. The snow was falling more lightly. At dawn, the storm broke. Sunlight came through the church windows, revealing a world buried in snow. Drifts 10 feet high in places, trees bent under the weight of snow. Daniel and the kids stayed in the church, waiting. Around 9 a.m., they heard engines, snowmobiles, approaching the church. Rescue teams. Finally, the teams had been searching all night, but couldn't get through until the storm broke. They found Daniel and all 10 kids, safe and unharmed. The kids told their parents about the figures, about the singing and the dancing. Their parents thought it was imagination, fear creating visions in the dark, but Daniel knew better. And one of the rescue team members pulled him aside before they left. "We found footprints," the man said quietly. "Around the church, in a circle, barefoot prints." "In this snow?" Daniel said. "That's impossible." "I know, but they're there. We took pictures. Those pictures were never released to the public." The official report said the school bus had taken shelter in the church and everyone was safe. No mention of the figures or the footprints or the singing, but Daniel Warren never drove a school bus again. He quit the next week, took a job at a hardware store in town. When people asked why, he just said he was ready for a change. But his wife knew, and she told their children years later what Daniel had told her. He said that what he saw that night convinced him that there were things in winter storms that didn't belong to our world. Things that came out when the snow was deepest and the cold was most bitter. Things that danced and sang while people froze. He never said he knew what they were. Spirits, maybe, or something older. Something that had lived in the Montana winters, long before people arrived. Something that saw a church full of children and decided, for whatever reason, not to come closer. Daniel Warren died in 2003. He was 79 years old. The 12 kids from that bus are adults now, with children and grandchildren of their own. Some of them still remember that night, Remember the figures in the snow. Remember the singing, and they wonder, like Daniel did, what would have happened if those figures had decided to come to the church door? If they'd tried to come inside? If Daniel had opened the door for them? They don't know. And they're grateful they never found out. Because some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors are better left unopened, especially in winter. Especially when strange figures are dancing in the snow. Especially then. That's 9 stories. 9 accounts of what happens when winter storms trap people and test them and push them to the very edge of survival. Some of these people were saved by their own determination and resourcefulness. Some were saved by the kindness of strangers, and some were saved by things they still can't explain. Winter is not forgiving. It doesn't care about your plans or your fears or your family waiting at home. It just is. Cold and brutal and relentless. But these stories also show something else. They show that humans are resilient, that we help each other, that we endure, and sometimes, just sometimes, there are things in the cold places that help too. Old things. Things that have been there longer than we can imagine. Things that understand winter in ways we never will. Thank you for listening tonight. Stay warm, stay safe, and if you ever find yourself trapped in a winter storm, remember these stories. Remember that you're not alone, even when you think you are, especially then.